We are taking a trip across the pond this week to Louisville, Kentucky for our story, and one that I think will leave you guys divided. 12 years ago this week, a tragedy took place at a football practice at Pleasure Ridge Park High School. A 15-year-old boy lost his life, and the coach, Jason Stinson, was left fighting for his freedom after being charged with the teenager's death. Welcome to the anniversary. Shwa-na-na-na, 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 shwa-na-na-na. Max Gilpin's official cause of death was heat stroke. He collapsed after an American football practice on the 20th of August 2008. For argument's sake, in this video, I'm just going to call it football. Obviously, I know the American football, soccer debate, but we're going to call it football for this video. There were over 100 witnesses to what happened on that fateful afternoon. The coach, according to members of the team and some parents, seemed to be in a particularly bad mood. This case is a little bit different because nobody denies the cause of Max's death. This is all about intention. There's a really good podcast on this case that is a lot longer than the 10 minutes that I allow myself here in these videos, called Court Junkie. I've linked it in the description box for you if you want to hear firsthand what the witnesses had to say and firsthand what Jason Stinson, the coach in this case as well, had to say. You hear from Max's family in this podcast. The lady, she plays audio from the actual trial, so I recommend listening to that. The football practice started as normal on that afternoon. There was a soccer game taking place in the field next door, so there were a lot of people watching that soccer game, and of course the usual parents who are watching the football practice go ahead. The events that took place and the way that the coach was acting towards the team meant that quite a few of the parents who were actually watching their daughters play soccer were distracted by what was happening at the football practice, and that's where their attention was. Practice wasn't going too well, and the coach, the head coach, Jason Stinson, was getting frustrated. He was getting the boys to do double the workouts that they would usually do in their full gear, meaning helmets, shoulder pads, knee pads, those t-shirts, all that sort of stuff that you wear during football. But it was a super hot day as well. He made them run and do up downs, which are like burpees, run gassers as well, super intense training until somebody quit. His exact words were, "We're gonna run until somebody quits." And the boys in the football practice knew this to be, until somebody quits the team, they're gonna keep doing their exercises. He was saying things like, who's gonna be the first player to quit? Who's going to be the first one out? When the kids would try to get water, he would call them prima donnas. He would say they're not working hard enough, and he would deny, call them back, and not let them go and get a drink. This is where things take a turn for the worse, because the players started to get ill. They, of course, are teenagers. Max, at the time of his death, was only 15 years old. And even though he was huge, he weighed over 200 pounds, his body couldn't handle the exertion. I've been reading up about the different types of heat stroke that can happen, and there are two different kinds. One is non-exertional, and that is when you are really old or really sick or really young and you're left in like a hot building or a hot car. So think if you've got an older person in their house during a heat wave, they're at risk of non-exertional heat stroke. And then you have exertional heat stroke, and that is attributed to sporting. So that is when your body temperature goes up way too high whilst you're doing a physical activity. Max wasn't the only player on the team to get ill that day. Multiple kids on the team experienced vomiting, they were collapsing. A lot of the witnesses said that there was a lot of wheezing going on. It seemed like the kids couldn't catch their breath. It was really loud, and the coach wouldn't let them get water. Of course, there are standards and there are practices. Some of the kids, when they were told they weren't allowed to have a drink, did it anyway, and he called them cowards. He said that they were weak because he was angry and because he was trying to work them super hard. 2 players walked off of the field, and Coach Stinson said, and I quote, "Ding, ding, ding, we have ourselves a winner," and practice was over. Max collapsed and he fell on his all fours, and he was trying to get up, but he couldn't hold his own weight. He had thrown up twice, I think it was, during the practice, and then he had collapsed. When Max did collapse, It was the other players on the team that rushed to his aid at first. The head coach, Jason Stinson, wasn't paying attention. He was talking to another bunch of players about their shoddy performances on the field. A parent even tried to intervene. One of the guys who was watching the soccer game, a kid had dropped to the floor, who that kid ended up being Max, and the parent screamed over at the coach saying that he was abusing the kids. And once practice had finished, Max tried to get up, but he fell and he became unresponsive. It wasn't Coach Stinson who went to his aid. It was initially a few other players in the team, and they were even berated by the coach. He shouted at them that they're not medical personnel, they're not medical professionals, and they're not his mother, they need to leave him alone. But Coach Stinson didn't approach Max once he fell over. It was other assistant coaches on the team. They put him on a cot and they took him over to the water fountain and they put him under it so the water would go on his body. It took 9 minutes for the ambulance to be called, and a mother actually spoke to the coach once Max had been taken to the water hose. She said that she was concerned. She said that she's a medical professional. He was like, don't worry, he's fine, he's going to be cool. But he hadn't even gone over to check. And it was this woman who called the police because she was so concerned. Max wasn't the only one to be hospitalised after that practice. There was another player called Antonio, but he got better, while Max never regained consciousness. His temperature went up to 107 degrees. It was at that temperature for way too long. You have about a 40-minute window when it comes to heat stroke and bringing the body's temperature down in order to survive. But because it took so long to call an ambulance, because the temperature reducing methods hadn't been implemented until he got to the hospital, Max didn't make it. It took 3 days for Max to pass away while his liver, his kidneys, his organs failed. And on August 23rd, today, 12 years ago, he died with all of his family by his side. This is thought to be the first case of its kind in American history. Although Max is not the first boy to fall seriously ill or die during American football practice, his case was the first where a coach was tried for a death during practice. Stinson was charged with reckless homicide and wanton endangerment, which in the state of Kentucky is defined as a crime where the perpetrator is aware that their act or their failure to act creates a significant risk of death or grievous bodily harm in the victim. And wanton endangerment is defined as when a person acts under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to human life. The prosecution attempted to paint Coach Stinson as obsessed with winning at any cost, regardless of the harm that it brought to the kids that he was training. They said that the players from Louisville's Pleasure Ridge Park High School were in full gear, and several of them, including Max, were denied water, told to keep running sprints, which are the gases, in 94-degree heat, even after they vomited, after they collapsed, after they were wheezing. And when Max collapsed, the coach didn't get within 10 feet of him, even though he had a duty of care. The defence, though, said that whilst it was a tragedy, Max's death wasn't the coach's fault. They insisted that an amphetamine that Max was taking contributed heavily to his death. The defence argued that it was the Adderall in Max's system that caused him to overheat. The trial went on, and Coach Jason Stinson was found not guilty. Not guilty of reckless homicide, not guilty of causing Max's death. The prosecution just couldn't convince the jury beyond a reasonable doubt of the intent of the coach's actions. And I think this says a lot about sports culture in America and also worldwide. You know, in order to be an athlete, you've got to be the best, you've got to be aggressive, you've got to be all this stuff. But where do we draw the line? Where is it hard training versus torture? Where is it giving the extra push versus being abused? And in this case, I think that's kind of where the question is, you know. Whilst Coach Stinson was found not guilty in the case of Max's death, the school did pay a settlement to Max's family. I do want to know what you think of this case from what I've told you here today. Trust me, there is so much more to it, but we only have 10 minutes. Should Jason Stinson have been found responsible for Max's death in your opinion? Do you think the jury were right to acquit him? Drop a comment in the box and let me know your thoughts on the story of Max Gilpin, the 15-year-old teenager who died today, 12 years ago in 2008.